The Find Your True North podcast and blog are dedicated to exploring intuition and how we use it in our businesses and lives. Together, we'll learn how to sharpen our intuition to make our daily decision-making easier. We'll find out how to hear the language of intuition, and we'll learn how to remove the emotional, mental, and physical barriers we might have to hearing it. Today we'll be talking with Chris Plough. Chris founded MavenWire, which became an 8-figure global company before he sold it to pursue other ventures. Along the way, he returned to college and received his degree in theater arts, acting, and directing. Chris is also known for his adventures. He leans hard against limits in order to enjoy a great story, from performing naked on a stage in front of hundreds to trekking across Siberia and sub-zero temperatures on a motorcycle to reach the Arctic Circle. In this episode, Chris and I will be talking about how he blends experience, intellect, and intuition, how a trip through Mongolia in an ambulance changed his relationship with his inner voice, how empathy can lead to better intuition, and the spectrum of procrastination, intuition, and perfectionism. For more information about the Find Your True North podcast, visit www.intuition.today. Enjoy the episode. So, first question for you is, what do you think of when you hear the word intuition? What's your definition of it?
Gut feeling. I think I associate it with gut, although the sensation isn't gut. It's like a deeper knowledge, unconscious knowledge.
So, is it associated with a physical location?
Like physical locations. So like for me, sometimes it can show up like goosebumps on my arm, right? Okay. Or the hairs in the back of my neck stick up a little bit. So it depends on the situation. It shows up differently. More like the sense that there's an idea there that you need to follow that's really interesting. Like I'll get sensations on my arm and goosebumps. Mm-hmm. A sense that this is a dangerous place or whatever else. Because for me, I honed a lot of it in adventures, right? So I get the hairs in the back of my neck that stick up going, something's just not quite right here.
Interesting.
Connecting with somebody and just like following where that goes and, do I trust this person? Do I not? Is definitely more of a, I don't know if I'd say heart center, but more of a body, kind of like a link between like the torso, like gut and chest a bit. Mm-hmm. And I don't know that it's specifically in one or the other.
Very cool. And how long have you been aware of these locational sensations? Is this something that you've honed as you've gotten to know yourself better?
Yeah, so definitely something I've become more aware of. It was interesting. Like it's like I used to live in two modes, and because I'm very intellectual and very I hope this doesn't sound bad, but I'm very intelligent, mm-hmm. right? And so I tend to use that quite a bit and have relied on that for a large part of my life. And so many situations I go into very intellectually and just run it through my mind. Though I think there's an intuition piece of that as to how you follow the trains that you follow. And then I go off on adventures or I do other things of that nature where the things I knew wouldn't serve me directly, and I had to work based off of intuition and work very quickly that way. And so for me, the past years have been melding those together, in which case I've become more aware of, this feeling tends to get associated with this situation that happens. Before I would just notice a feeling, mm-hmm. and I would then, it would make me aware of the situation, and I would just know, at some level that I needed to pay attention to something.
Do you have any good examples of how you've come to that realization, like maybe during some of your adventures? Because I know when I was traveling in South America, I had quite a few intuitive moments, but they were more directive, like this is not quite for you, or don't go here, which was almost hard to confirm because you have mm-hmm. to trust it, or you have to be like, well, I'm going to test it and maybe regret that. But I'm curious, yeah. I'm curious if you have any good examples.
Yeah, I can think of two. So one is the adventure, and it is more of that, be really careful here. So Steve, Dan, and I had driven the ambulance, this is on our trip to Mongolia, mm-hmm. From the UK to Mongolia. And we were in Novosibirsk, Russia at the time. We'd stopped for the night. It was like 2 a.m. or something. And we had to do our filming for the day before we stopped and everything else. We searched around the city, finally found this spot. that looked like there was enough light and kind of interesting and stuff to do our filming, which is our recap of the day, what's going on, where are we going next, stuff like that. Ended up being it was outside of a bar or nightclub or something along those lines. Didn't know exactly what it was. But we're doing our filming, and then this guy in a tracksuit kind of walks out and starts talking to us and everything else. And, my sense of him was, I don't know him. He's neutral. He's not necessarily bad. He's not necessarily good. Neutral. Let it go as it is. A few minutes after, we're doing our filming, and then another guy comes out, and more of a portly guy and everything else. They stand on opposite sides of us, right? And then in that situation, I just start to get that feeling of something's not quite right here, right? It's not that it's necessarily bad yet, but you've got the intellectual side of it, which is a bunch of like strangers in this town in a place we don't know with camera equipment. But it went deeper than that, right? So they were talking to us, and the conversations were friendly, but there was an undertone there that hit that deeper register, and the hairs in the back of my neck were definitely going up. So, I gather the guys, okay, we got to wrap up. Let's just be done here. Fine. And then we start walking away, and the two guys start following us. Which I'm like, oh, okay. Interesting situation. So I bend down as if to tie my shoe. I let the two guys pass while Steven and Dan continue going, and I follow behind the guys just so I can keep an eye on them. They peel off to the side. We go forward into the ambulance, and I'm like, that was fucking freaky, right? They're like, yeah, that was fucking freaky. So we then go like, we're going to be out of here. Don't know if it was bad or not, but intuition's telling us otherwise. So we drive like in this pattern all through the city and kind of like find a place that is secluded, out of the way, everything else. Like, fine, park, we're done. Okay, guys, how are you doing? Talk to each other. Okay. And then just all of a sudden, like this guy like ducks in the window, I look over, and it's the portly guy. And somehow they followed us and found us. And I'm like, fuck this. And I'm like, then it was like full on fight or flight, right? And I'm like, so there's no way you could have found us without specifically looking for us. You are not friendly. There's something else going on here. Like, pulled the ambulance out, and we like got the fuck out of there.
I love how you guys are trying to hide in an ambulance, though, too. Like, this had to be not the most discreet car.
Well, if I could transform it into something that was, slightly more urban escape-ish, I would. But yeah, and like that was. There are other times it's happened, but that's always the one that comes to mind because it was so deeply a bad situation, right? And who knows? Maybe nothing would have gone bad because I don't know that they decided what they wanted or what they were going to do, right? I think it was part of like this play back and forth. Mm-hmm. But the potential was there, and I felt it incredibly deeply.
Wow.
The other one that comes to mind is lighter in that, and I can't remember who's having this conversation. I really, really wish I could. I was having a conversation with somebody within our circles, and they talked about that sense of when something's a really good idea, they get goosebumps. And I don't remember if I would get goosebumps for that reason or not before, but it became predominant after that point.
Interesting.
Right? So I don't know if it was creating a link where the intuition and the body then knew how to better communicate with each other and were like, okay, if I do this, it means this, and there's a sense there, or whether it was always happening and I just became more aware of it.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, but so specifically since then, it's something like, I've got actually a few goosebumps right now that are popping up. It's something that I pay attention to for that reason specifically.
So kind of along the same line, when people talk about intuition, a lot of times they say it's a gut feeling, but there's a lot of other ways that it shows up for people. Mm-hmm. Do you ever hear anything, or like see? Some people hear sounds or see pictures, or they even smell something. Mm-hmm. Does it ever come up in those senses for you?
A little bit. So not in the day-to-day, not in the intuition that comes up day-to-day, right? But if I focus deeper on intuition in one of two ways, either I sit down to do writing, and writing is for me is that one place where if I'm in the right moment at the right time, I can let the world shut off and kind of allow what happens to happen, right?
Yeah.
And get more in touch with that creative process. When I do that, and I write and everything else, then there's I see, I touch, I feel, like all those senses come alive, and I'm finding a way to put them on paper without fully being aware of what's going on paper, right? And so I know that capability exists, but that doesn't show up in like that in the day-to-day intuition for me. The other time when it does pop up more synesthetically is, of course, using something like mushrooms or along those lines, where I think those barriers get dropped a bit, and they're chemicals that tend to enhance synesthesia.
Yeah.
So.
And then, have you used intuition in your business?
Yeah, I mean, all the time. I wasn't aware of it before. I would look at the fact that I took and continue to take a lot of risks in business, and they've almost always panned out. And I had attributed that for a long time to just my skills and ability to adapt and make a situation work. And I've come back to look at that and go, well, it's a mixture. I definitely have skills and abilities, but it's in choosing the right risks to take. And those choices I take for risks are informed by what's going on, informed by data, but the choice itself is based off of a gut feeling as to, is this the right way to go or is it not? And then the second place I use it is in relationships. That sense of, do I really trust somebody? Am I really connected to somebody? Or conversely, it could be whether I'm sussing them out, or conversely, whether I'm trying to develop a deeper relationship with somebody, right? I'll sit down with people and have a conversation, and often my conversations go deep, but the entire thing for me is driven by intuition as to where it goes. It's not really a thought process for me. It's not calculated.
Okay, so going back to the business example. Do you have an example that you can think of where you followed your intuition and for gain, and it went perfectly well despite maybe evidence to the contrary, or an example of your intuition was telling you don't do this and you ignored it and you found out otherwise?
Yeah.
Either one.
The biggest one that comes to mind for me in the intuition was when I started MavenWire. I think the odds were, if I look at it like realistically, the odds were against me. There was an intuition for me that this had to happen. So let me back up a second. I was at this company, Glog, and Oracle acquired that company. And I stayed on for 6 months because I got paid a bit of money to do so, and I wasn't sure what to do next. I didn't like that 6 months. It was horrible. I really did not like working for Oracle. In that time, I started having conversations with other people who were there who ran other departments. So I ran the R&D department that was around the technology that the software ran on. Mm-hmm. Other people ran consulting. Other people ran other little divisions and were really experienced in it. And they kept talking. We have conversations of, well, we should leave. We could start a company. We could provide services around the software. I know this. And it was like, it was like the team of experts. Mm-hmm. But after 3 months, the conversations kept going and never went anywhere. And I kept getting the sense that that this is what I need to do, that this is the step for me, even though I'd never done consulting before in my life. I knew nothing about the industry. I'm competing against the big five, Capgemini, Deloitte, all the big multi-billion-dollar companies. I have no reputation in the space, all of the things going against it. And ended up, I left and created MavenWire and followed that path through. Many of the initial jobs and stuff that we got were based off of both the goodwill I developed while working at Glog and the intuition of, I should try this place, I shouldn't do this one, I should try this one. And ultimately led me to creating one of the most successful companies in that particular space, regardless of all of the obstacles against us. And in that first year, it was that sense of, I have to do this. And I honestly can't say exactly where that came from. that kept me through, because I had to pull all the money out of my 401k in order to fund the company. For the first year and a half, I didn't take any salary, so I was living off of a deficit. All the things were pointing towards this wasn't necessarily a good choice,
Wow.
and ended up, pulling through.
That's amazing.
Yeah, yeah. I'm thankful for it. I'm very thankful for it.
So most people would give into the fear side of that equation. I'm having to pull out all this money to do this. Did you experience fear in that situation at all?
And it's interesting in retrospect that I remember less fear, and I think that the memory does that, right? So did I experience fear? Absolutely. The reason I can say that probably more definitively is, similarly, I'm going through that transition now. So I sold MavenWire, and I'm going through the transition of starting the next thing, right? And in that point where I'm, pulling out of savings to live because I don't have like the income coming in, all of that stuff, and feeling that fear very viscerally of, oh, this is how uncomfortable this is, yet still feeling a need to do it.
Yeah.
So if I think back, I don't remember the fear at all. But having going through the exact same thing again now and feeling it very viscerally now, I would say yes, most definitely there was definitely fear.
So what is your next big thing now?
So it's actually three things that are all kind of combined into like one central core, I believe. What I've realized for me that's important is I want to be that guide to help other people achieve the things that they're capable of and make a meaningful impact in this world. And I can do so in multiple ways. I understand the business side of it. I can help people with that. The personal side has become incredibly interesting to me, and all the blocks that really keep us from succeeding, and we'll blame it on all the outside stuff, but it's really the internal blocks and working through that. And so I am nearly done with a book outline for around the topic of trust, connection, and relationships, and how to use those to really make a meaningful impact going forward. I plan to begin speaking on that. And then I have two ventures starting with two different groups of people that are along the same lines. One is experiences and adventures to take entrepreneurs on, to break them apart, and then in that space do some deep work and then continue forward. And I'm working with Shelby and Matt Pryor to develop a year-long curriculum that we will, and a set of adventures and experiences that we'll take entrepreneurs on in order to achieve those goals. And then I'm working with James Waltz and James Ton on something called Exponential University, which is taking essentially all of the traits that have been identified to grow exponential organizations, so often the technology-based organizations, and helping companies implement those. And we're coming in from different mindsets. If I look at it, I think that James Ton is best when you start to look at the scalability and the futurism type look, right? James is amazing when it comes to processes and technology and lean and agile. And I get to come in and look at the holistic entrepreneur and how can we prepare an entrepreneur who's going to be the bottleneck because all the other things are really readily scalable in order to achieve that. Wow. So we're developing that curriculum. The curriculum is going to be available free to everyone. And I should say that it's still under wraps because we haven't fully released like Exponential University, and we want to get further down the road before we make it widely available. But the curriculum will be freely available because we want everybody to be able to benefit from it. And then we will work with like the ones that we believe are like the top of the top of the top in order to invest, advise, and take them to their full capability.
Wow. That's quite a lot on your plate.
Yeah, well, I've realized that like at different times in my life, I've been a workaholic, and a workaholic is something I would define as it's detrimental to your life. What I've realized is I really fucking love working, and there's a difference between being a workaholic and just having a lot of what you really love to do around you. Right. And that's what the future seems more like is there's a lot of stuff to do, but stuff I want to do.
It sounds more like play to you than
yeah, it's like a playground. Like seriously, sit down with great entrepreneurs and work this stuff out. And I love how for me, and I'll get off this in a second, but I love like for me, like they're all interlinked. It's like the work that I get to do individually with people leads towards better work for the experiences and the curriculum that we take people on, leads towards better effects on the organizations, the exponential organizations that will have an incredible impact on this world, right? Everything seems to stack up in my mind. And I love that. For me, it seems highly leveraged. I get to focus on one thing mostly and see it expressed in all these ways that will have a larger impact than I could ever achieve on my own.
Cool. And I assume intuition comes into play in all of these ventures as well.
It does, especially in the partnerships that are being developed, because to find those people you can really work well with and sustainable, especially knowing the things that have gone bad in previous partnerships, it's playing an incredible role there. And then the second piece is that I think when you start like doing real work with people, I don't know if there's, unless you're going purely academic, I don't know if you can do it without intuition, right? Like, how do you help somebody through the blocks and the difficulties that they're going through without that sense of you're having a conversation with them and you know that they're saying this, but you're noticing this and this and this, and you understand there's an undercurrent here that they may not fully be aware of. I don't know how to get a sense of that without intuition. It's the only way I can see to tap into that in order to help guide them where they need to go versus where they want to go.
Yeah. That's an interesting point, too. Do you think that it's easy to have... Okay, let me figure out how I want to ask this question. When you're guiding someone like that, do you think that intuition comes into play because you've experienced what they've experienced before? And another way to ask that is, if you haven't experienced what they're going through, can you have the intuitive hit?
So I haven't thought about this before, but an answer immediately comes to mind. I think you need to have experienced a broad range of things that you can then associate with, but not necessarily what they are, right? So I think what this ties down to, and I think is really closely linked to intuition, but not the same thing, is empathetic, is being empathy and being really empathetic. My past, again, we've talked about before, but having gone deeply into acting and theater and everything else, right? And I think acting is that sense of using empathy to an incredible degree to try to put yourself into a fictional or a real character's position, and then see the world entirely from their eyes and express yourself entirely from their eyes, and express yourself entirely with their words, right, as written on the script, etc. While that's not the place I ended up going, nor do I want to go, I find those skills incredibly useful. So if I've got a full range of experiences, so we'll call them notes, right? So I've got a full range of notes that I have heard before, felt before, whatever it might be, then as somebody's going through something, if I can empathize enough to put myself in their position and see the world from their eyes, I can feel those notes. I can feel how that feels, and then I can then use the intuition to guide from there. So I may not know exactly, like you and I will have a conversation, and honestly, until it happens in my life, I'll never know exactly what it's like to have a child, right? And especially from a wound's perspective, that's something I will especially never know. But there are hits along the way that I will understand and I can relate to. And those may come from my childhood. Those may come from the beautiful experiences I've had with my nephews. They may come from the time that Jim Shields' little girl Maggie finally warmed up to me and came over and crawled into my lap, and that sense that I felt, right? And so I can begin to play that back, and I won't know your story perfectly, but I can know it enough to be able to give what I believe is grounded advice.
And what do you think the biggest barrier to intuition is? Like, what do you think prevents people, or you specifically, from using it or feeling it?
Yeah, it's so I think people put up say that there are a lot of barriers. I believe it's a little deeper, and it can be being too intellectual. It can be just not knowing or understanding your intuition, being out of touch with feelings, all these things. I believe in my worldview. So to be clear, in my worldview, almost everything comes down to trust, right? And so I think that really what it comes down to is that trust in yourself, and everything else is just a symptom of that. So why would you be more intellectual versus trusting a feeling that comes up? It's because there's an inherent not quite enough information or not quite enough experience to trust yourself fully in that area. Why would you value somebody else's opinion over your own? Again, for me, it comes down to a personal level of trust. Mm-hmm. So if I boil it down to its most, what I feel is the most, the finest particular point I can put on it, it's self-trust. But then for me, again, like I said earlier, everything builds off of that. For me, I think that self-love is actually formed after you have self-trust, so on and so forth. And so it's the core of a lot of things in the human experience.
That's a great insight. My journey has been one of always valuing other people's insight and opinion over mine.
Hell yeah, me too.
For years, including teachers. I was always seeking teachers, guides, mentors, coaches, someone else to tell me what I needed to do, or the next step, something like that. And in the last few years, it's only been in the last few years that I've realized that I've been foregoing my own opinion and my own intuition for so long. And I've had to almost forcibly say, I don't want your advice. It's interesting how that pattern has been there for so long for me that I seem to keep attracting people who want to tell me what to do. And it's not to say that I don't need advice or guidance at times. It's more like I almost have to put myself on a diet of it to listen to myself, and to be wrong if I'm, maybe to learn how to be wrong, or learn when I'm right, without the interference of someone else. And that's when my intuition has gotten a lot stronger.
There's two things that you said there, one specifically around intuition and one tangentially related, I think are worth just mentioning. One is that you said you had to cut out the advice in order to allow it to be quiet enough to hear your intuition. So when your intuition is weaker, or you just don't know the voice of your intuition, right? I think that there is that it's cutting out media, it's cutting out learning, it's cutting out even the books, all the stuff that we consume and bring in, whether it's opinions, it's being around people, whatever it might be. It's cutting out that consumption enough so that you can hear, right? And then allowing it to become louder. Or you just tune into that voice more, and then when things are loud, you can still hear that voice, right? So I think that you hit something really, really key there. The second thing is around that trusting other people and valuing their opinion over your own, which I 100% relate to. I think what that allows for, once you get past that, once you develop enough trust in yourself and your own intuition and your own knowledge and your own experience of the world, is it allows for different relationships. In that mentor-student relationships, teacher-student, there's always a hierarchy there. And unfortunately, it never allows for a full relationship because there's always some level of looking up to somebody and something that they are held to and something you're held from, right? Yeah. Only when you finally get that point of saying, I value myself as much as you, can you get a true relationship that is equal, that allows you to both teach each other. You can say, great, I know this, and I'm sharing this with you, and you know this, you can share this with me, so you can learn from each other, but in a way where you break that hierarchy down. And for me, that's the basis of a true relationship versus everything else. I don't think you can have a true relationship that is hierarchical, at least not in the way that we think of giving and sustainable and relationships where you both take from and you give to freely.
I haven't thought about it that way, but I've become very aware of the teacher-student relationship, also because I feel like I've noticed a lot of, I think we might have talked about this, coaches, it seems like there's a lot of coaches and teachers, mentors, people who want to be coaches and teachers and mentors. Not to say that they don't have something of value to give, but they are also there because they like the hierarchy, because they like to have the following. Yeah. And I feel like when you're not listening to yourself, you're very easily prey to that kind of a dynamic. Yeah. That's been my experience in the last few years.
Yeah, and I think it's a huge validation on both sides. One is the validation from the teacher of, I've got something important and these people believe I'm important, right? And then the second is there's a validation on the student side as well of I am worthy of this attention from a teacher or whatever else, right? And that's fine. But I think that once you get past that understanding of that and realize that it's not necessary, that you can learn from each other and still be completely equal, just in different ways. Yeah. That it changed the dynamic from one that it feels very secure and healthy and sustainable versus one that has on both sides at least a tinge, maybe a lot more of neediness, right? Which I think is just corrosive and unhealthy.
Right. Agreed. So back to something about fear. Mm-hmm. How do you know if you're getting... That was good. If you're getting a hit that's saying we need to get out of here or don't go do that, don't go take that risk, how do you discern between fear and intuitive hit?
I'm going to make a different distinction here because I think that it's and if you don't believe it's the right one, then correct me and go down, right? But I think that the really important one to discern is not intuition versus fear, because I think they can be interlinked. It's intuition versus anxiety, right? Fear versus anxiety. Yeah, not intuition versus anxiety. I think that fear is a sense, and it's a very deep instinctual sense that can be linked to intuition to help keep you safe, right? But fear, I think, is often mistaken for anxiety or being uncomfortable, and those are the things that we will say, I'm afraid to do that. But really, I feel incredibly uncomfortable to do that. I don't want to do that for some reason, but it's not fear. Fear is like my life could be in danger or there's a substantial risk here, right? Versus the if I do this, I may face rejection or I may face ostracization from this crowd, or people may think I'm dumb, or all the other things that we come up with, right? So I work really hard in my own life and with others to make that distinction between fear and anxiety, because I believe that anxiety is, or that uncomfortableness, however it best resonates with you, that's a thing that has to absolutely be leaned into every time we feel it. And fear is something to be respected. Fear is something that's telling you deeply, this should not be done for one reason or another. And it may simply be because you're not ready for it, but it may also be very deeply because something incredibly bad could happen here to your life, to your well-being, to others.
I like that answer. Anxiety versus fear. I can definitely relate to that.
I think everybody resonates with slightly different words. Some people it's uncomfortable, some people it's anxiety, but each person I talk to about that can feel that difference, and it becomes clear, and it does for me as well, of that, am I avoiding doing that thing because of an actual fear, or am I avoiding doing it because it's uncomfortable, because it's creating me a lot of anxiety? And if it's anxiety, then the only two ways to get rid of it are either do it or let it go completely and forget about it. That's the only way to get it out of your life.
So that's my follow-up question. Do you usually lean towards leaning into the anxiety and doing it, or is it kind of 50-50?
I do. So I believe very specifically, like I put myself in a lot of uncomfortable situations in life via the adventures, via business, via the personal development and understanding myself. And so I believe very strongly in it. At the same time, and this is where I think intuition plays a role, is just because something is creating anxiety there doesn't mean that it's this moment right now that you have to jump into it. Number one is just to become aware of it. It's an awareness that this is causing me anxiety, right? I'll give an example from today. Like there is a message I need to send back to somebody that I've known that I've needed to for about a week, right? And it's not a fear. There's some anxiety I have around it because of the subjects that we have to work through. I could have done it a week ago, and just gotten it out of there. And often that's the right answer. I think quicker is almost always better, right? Because you get through it, you get past it, and you move on to the next thing that's more important. But every time I'd sit down to do it, something would pull me back. And it would be like, oh, I don't really want to do this now. And it was a little bit deeper than just, I'm uncomfortable doing this right now. Mm-hmm. The best sense I can give, because I think intuition gets to be tough in describing it because it becomes more visceral. The best I can describe it is, I haven't yet fully processed this. And until I fully process it, it's not right to give a message or an answer back, right? For two reasons. One is that there's probably still a lesson here that I need to learn. And so by processing it, I can learn that lesson. But second, my perspective will get shifted as I continue processing it. And it may be one that is more understanding and empathetic to the other person, right? So I always lean in, but to that degree of, does it have to be today, or does it have to be as the time is right, but in the near future? I leave up to intuition to help guide that a little bit more.
I love that, because now I can call it intuition and not procrastination.
It's a fine line. It's truly a fine line, right? And let's be honest, we can fool ourselves a shit ton with it. Oh, no, I'm not feeling it today. No, I'm not feeling it. It's.
I know what you mean, though. I've got one of those, too, where it has not been the right time because I have not fully processed everything.
Yeah.
And until I have, there just isn't anything really to say that's going to be true in the end, or as authentic and clear and real as I want it to be, until I've given myself that time to process.
And then the other side of that, so you've got one side which is procrastination, then you have this medium side which is doing the right thing at the right time, but leaning into that anxiety, right? And then you've got the far side of it, which is perfectionism, right? So I'm glad, because I hadn't actually thought about it this way until this conversation. So I'm really enjoying this. So I would say, if you could become aware of what procrastination feels like and what perfectionism feels like, avoid the fuck out of those and live in that middle ground, right? And that middle ground is that's the safe, warm, that's the Goldilocks place. Like, that's the place you want to be.
I like that. Okay, do you have any other thoughts on intuition that I haven't tapped into?
The thing that comes to mind is, for a long time, I would live my life in two modes. And it would be at different phases of my life. It'd either be the creative mode and the intellectual mode, right? And it was back when I was doing theater during the night and working at a technology startup during the day. And I would, swap back and forth between the two, though I would see some overlap in them, right? Mm-hmm. And then it became how I was on adventures and how I was in real life. And one being very in the flow, intuition driven, and one being much more analytical and intellectual driven, right? And I've striven, that's a word. We're making that a word. I've striven for the past few years to close the gap and to bring those together, right? So that the way I operate in life is holistic and is there regardless of the situation I'm in, because it serves me. Mm-hmm. And where I've come to is the belief that all of these things, intuition, intellectualism, emotions, all of these things are simply tools. And you find the ones that give you the answers that are right to you most often, and you rely on them. And then you look to the others to help fill in the gaps. And I think that I can't say for everybody, because it's hard to blanket statements like that. Mm-hmm. For me and most of the people I know, I think that having intuition as that core engine, and then having checkpoints where you then, will stop and use intellectualism to look at the map and understand where you're going and be a bit more strategic, right? And then drop it for a little bit and then go back to the intuition flow driving you forward. Mm-hmm. And then have another checkpoint where you check things again. I think that for me, that's a healthier point in life. So I've come to one where intuition is the engine, and then I do look at the gauges now and then via intellectualism, via strategy, via outside advice, etc., in order to course correct and fine tune that intuition as I go forward. So, an overall way of saying, if you operate in more than one mode in life, I think that there's a way to pull all of this together so that you don't feel fractured. You don't feel like there are multiple versions of you, multiple ways of operating, and instead there's one way that really fits every situation I've come across in life. Whether you're fucking stranded in the Gobi Desert, you're in a business meeting, or you're having a good conversation with friends, it seems to all really work well.
That's great insight. I haven't thought about it that way at all. I feel like it's interesting how you talk about bringing it into a holistic tool set instead of just, this part over here. Because I have a couple of different ways that I try to work with my intuition and play with it. But like, I still have a hang up around some of it. Like, I like tarot cards. I got into tarot cards because it was an external way for me to reflect back at myself because I wasn't hearing my intuition. This is kind of in the beginning of my own journey on this stuff. But I see that as woo-woo, so I really don't tell people about it. I have to force myself to talk about it or to even bring it up when that doesn't mean I'm not intellectual as well. It's just one thing that I like to practice with.
So on that line, and I'm glad you brought that up, so I'll state this really clearly. I read my horoscope every day. Right? Okay. And I don't really believe in horoscopes, right? But here's what I believe. I believe that intuition is that lens you see the world through. And so it helps you interpret things that you see or hear, right? So you use tarot, right? I look at the horoscope each day, and they're written broadly enough that you can interpret them a billion different ways, right? But if you allow yourself, you can allow yourself to interpret it in the way that you need to hear it right now. Right. So I don't think that it's astrology that is like magic super. It's telling me what to do in my life, but it's instead how I'm choosing to interpret that, knowing what I need to learn or do or what I've been avoiding that is helpful. And so it becomes, like you said, that external reflection that gives you something back that helps to shape how you work that day or that moment or that decision that's going on.
I love that. Where do you go for your horoscope?
There's two apps. I can't remember which ones. I don't actually know the names of the apps. There's two apps I look at each morning, right? And I've just found that for whatever reason, and one of them more than another, it just has the right questions or the right, cues. It's not questions, cues. There you go. That seem to work well. That if I get through the day, I can often look back and go, "Wow, I applied that and it worked out really well for me," right? And so I look at all these things. A lot of things that are woo-woo as inside of the human, we've got a bunch of shit that we don't fully understand how it works. The subconscious, the conscious, whether or not we're connected to a higher intelligence, all of these things, right? And I think that all these are possible, but we don't really understand how they work. All we know is it's a black box, but we do know that there's these different tool sets or different instrument panels, and they could be spiritual, they can be, it could be tarot, it could be religion, it could be all of these things. Are ways of affecting to either affect change or to gauge where we are and understand ourselves a little bit deeper. And so for me, they're all valid. They're all valid if the ultimate search that you're on is one of self-truth and self-actualization and understanding, and one that is compatible with like all humans being good and getting better in this world, right? Yeah. So I don't care what lens you look at it as long as it works for you. Because I think that essentially we're all trying to affect the same core.
I like that take. I also like hearing that you read your horoscope every day.
Yeah, I do. It's the same like you. It's something I never admit to, right? Because it's like, wait, horoscope?
I know.
Yeah, fuck it. I also have like decks and decks and decks of like questions in here because I think the right question unlocks things, right? Because again, it helps to drive your intuition. And I think you could do the exact same thing and get the exact same results by just randomly picking a card and reading a question or a quote or whatever else, right?
Exactly. That's what I love about the tarot is it doesn't matter what card comes up, it's going to trigger something for you. Yeah. It's pretty amazing that way.
So, and I know this is an interview of me and everything else, but now that you're becoming a deeper and deeper expert on intuition, is there anything that you've learned in this process that you would like to share back with me, so that something that you haven't heard that you think that I could benefit from, so that I grow from this as well?
I think what I'm seeing is that people have intuitive hits in more ways than one, but they may not really be aware of it. So you're very aware of sensory actions, the prickles on the back of your neck, the goosebumps on your arm, things like that. And one of the reasons I said I go back and forth between sending the questions to people is because of an experience I had with Steve and Christopher.
Mm-hmm.
So I asked him, how does intuition show up for you? And he said, it's that voice in your head. I said, okay, so do you hear the words? And he's like, oh no, it's a gut feeling. And I kind of came back to it later in the interview, and I said, it's interesting because there's a lot of different ways that intuition comes up for people. Some people see pictures, some people hear words. I've had both of those experiences.
Yeah.
Some people have the sensorial experiences. Some people define it more as a feeling internally, and some people smell things. And I said I would challenge you to think about whether you actually do hear something, because that was your very first reaction. But when I pressed you on it, you went to, oh, but no, it's a gut feeling, because maybe you're not even aware that you're hearing things. So that's what I've been thinking is the most interesting thing, is that it shows up. There's the way that we're aware of it showing up, and then there are other ways that maybe we haven't really turned and looked at. For Daryl, it was interesting for me to hear him say that when he's talking to somebody and he feels that maybe not dishonest, outright dishonest, but something's off in what they're saying, he'll hear it as a discordant symphony, like sounds that are just off and unharmonious.
Yeah.
And so I think that's kind of the most interesting thing, is everyone has intuition to some degree. Some have actively developed it and paid attention to it, and some of it is just there. They don't even think about it. But it seems like everyone has what they acknowledge as an intuitive ability, and what may be kind of on the shadow side that is helping them, but they're not really aware of it.
The thing that brings to mind is twofold. One is that often I associate like the voices in the head with the more intellectual thinking, right? Like the intellectual side versus the intuitive side, right? But everybody's different. And I'm glad you said that, because it brings a wider perspective there.
Yeah.
But the other piece goes back to what I had said about the goosebumps. I wonder if, because we're always trying to find ways to allow that deeper part of ourselves to more easily communicate with a higher part of ourselves, right? The more conscious part of ourselves. Higher is not the right word. More conscious. I wonder if just being aware of those allows for more communication. Because like I said, I don't know if I actually got the goosebumps before hearing that, or if that just became something that then became a clear sign that allowed, the intuition and the more conscious part of the brain to communicate better. And I wonder if hearing things like, Daryl hears, this discord, allows for a different way for intuition to be expressed, even in me, right? So becoming aware of these may open up other options that were either dormant or just may not have existed because they weren't a viable communication path before, right?
Going back to the words, you said, a lot of times we associate hearing the voice as your intellect. When I've experienced hearing words, it's very rare for me, and it's usually kind of startling. Like there's no other evidence to support it. So for me to try to confirm it, I'll give you a good example. For me to try to confirm it is usually pretty awkward. For example, I was talking with a friend of mine who has a brother, and we were talking about family, and I said, "Is it just you and your brother, or do you have any sisters or anything else?" And he said, "No, just me and my brother." And I heard the words, "There was a girl," and I saw an image of like a pregnant woman, but somehow in that I also knew that the pregnancy was lost.
Yeah.
either through abortion or through miscarriage, but that it just it didn't go.
Yeah.
But I'm sitting here, and my friend was kind of young at the time, and I was like, that's weird. I don't want to ask him. What if he doesn't know? What if he has no idea? And by asking him, I'm opening some can of worms, or he has to go ask his mother, and that's a whole problem. So I said nothing, but I just noticed, like, okay, that was an interesting intuitive hit. Wow. And a half hour later, he came back to it. We totally left the subject, and he came back to it, and he said, oh, yeah, you know what? By the way, there was actually a sister. I was supposed to have a sister, but my mother miscarried. And it was kind of strange how he confirmed it. I didn't have to say anything, but yeah. I noticed when I heard the words, it was startling. Like, it was not my intellectual voice or the tone of my intellectual voice, which can be all kinds of things, within my own mind. But it was very, someone is telling me this, almost as if it was someone saying it in my ear, although I don't think that was what was happening. It was just,
I know what you mean. That's just the sense that it was.
Right.
So that brings up something that I'll keep in mind and just have an awareness of is it's always my voice for sure when I think of like the intellectual like stuff running, right? It's always my voice. So if there's ever something that's not or different, I'll keep open to that and see what that's like.
Yeah. The first time that happened, I was 16 and I'd snuck out of I was almost 18. I was 17. Because we had a curfew in our city. So I had snuck out of the house with my best friend to go TP some friends of ours. And we had very unsubtly gone and bought huge bunches of toilet paper.
What are you doing? Oh, running low, way low.
Right. So we were in the parking lot. It's past midnight, which was the curfew time. We were in the parking lot, and we were putting the toilet paper rolls in the trunk. And I heard the voice say, a cop is coming. And I kind of looked up and I was like, there's no cop in the parking lot. Like the road, you could see the road, there's nothing. I was like, nah, it's not going to happen. And 2 minutes later, this cop came and parked right behind us. Because I think maybe someone in the store had called the police.
Yeah, I can see that, yeah.
But that was my first experience of it. And I'd completely ignored it. And so I'm always trying to pay attention to it when it comes up.
That's interesting. The place that's absolutely most predominant in my life is in conversations with people, like guiding conversations and uncovering things, and often like learning or hearing stories that I haven't heard before, or often people haven't said before, and the path to those. That's when it's most predominant. But in those other areas, like I said, decision making, I'm absolutely aware of it as well. I don't know that I've had that. I've had a bad feeling about an environment, but I haven't had a premonition, and that would be a very interesting experience.
Yeah. And one final note before I sign off. After recording this episode, I reflected a little more about our conversation regarding the student-teacher relationship. It's not at all that I think all coaches and teachers are in it to feel superior as a blanket statement. It's simply that I believe that a dynamic of hierarchy naturally exists within a student-teacher relationship unless very consciously worked against. And in some cases, that's not always in the best interest of everyone involved. It can lead to a relationship that is not beneficial for both parties. And I say this from a place of experience, having had a coach who utterly thrived on being above her clients. So, to all the coaches, teachers, and mentors out there, I want you to know that I respect what you do. When done in a way that serves all parties involved, a good coaching relationship can be the difference between living average and living off the charts. Thanks again to Chris Plough for taking the time to speak with me, and thank you for listening.